The Thursdays in Black movement is a global movement sponsored by the World Council of Churches. It is not a new movement. In fact, it's a movement that came out in the 1980s during the World Council of Churches decade of the Churches in Solidarity with Women, which ran from 1988 to 1998. It was inspired by the campaign of the mothers of the disappeared in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, who on Thursdays protested in the Plaza de Mayo against the disappearance of their children during the time of the violent dictatorship. It was also influenced and inspired by the women in Black in Israel and Palestine, who up to now continue to protest the war and the violence in that part of the world. It was also inspired by the women in Rhodesia, in Rwanda and Bosnia, who were protesting against the use of rape as a weapon of war during the genocide period. It was also inspired by the Black Sash movement in South Africa, protesting against apartheid and its use of violence against Black people. These movements inspired the initiative around Thursdays in Black, which was meant to be both a protest against the reality of gender-based violence, violence against women and children and youth. It is also a statement about the active resistance and resilience of those who stand up for the realities of struggling against gender-based violence. The international movement, which now is an invitation for churches and civil societies across the globe to wear Black on Thursdays, to testify to the reality, the continuing reality of gender-based violence in our society, to act as a silent witness, but also to take the initiative to deal with the reality in their own context, whether that means advocating for policy change, that means working in partnership with others to end the systemic challenges of violence against women and children, who seek to change patterns of behavior when it comes to the reality of gender-based violence. In our particular context in Canada, we want to be conscious of the fact that this is critical for us. And here are some stats that may help. 6.3 million women and girls in the Canadian context will experience some kind of violence in their lifetime. 6.3 million women and girls in the Canadian society will experience some kind of violence in their lifetime. Every 2.5 days, a woman is murdered or experiences some form of gender-based violence in this society of ours. One of the focus that we want to give, particularly in the Canadian context, is the reality of violence against Indigenous women. And an Indigenous woman is 6 times more likely to experience violence than other women in the context of the Canadian society. These are the realities that invites us into this place of consideration how we as churches and civil society in our context can take a stand against gender-based violence in the Canadian context. So we invite you to join us as part of Thursdays in Black Back to you, Bishop.
Thank you very much, Michael. I would like to introduce our first speakers now, who come to us from the Moosehead Campaign. Sage Lacerte is a carrier from the Lake Babine Nation. Sage was instilled with the value of family, community, and culture from a very young age. Her role as Moosehead Campaign's ambassador has been a natural evolution of her family's commitment to ending violence against women and children, coupled with her own experiences as a youth, assisting Indigenous women gain food security, financial independence, and safety. Sage continued her journey by completing her degree in gender studies from the University of Victoria, graduating with honors, and being recognized with several academic awards, as well as receiving a grant from the Indigenous Innovation Initiative. This seed money became the foundation of the SAGE Initiative, which provides Indigenous women the skill and pathways to become impact investors that honor Indigenous concepts of commerce. SAGE was recently named to Social Purpose Founders to Watch by the Future of Good, as well as Canada's Top 30 Under 30 Sustainability Leaders by Corporate Knights. Through her experience, knowledge, and platform, Sage has become a tireless advocate for Indigenous women and children across Canada. We also welcome David Stephenson, who has spent the last 25 years leading Indigenous social wellness initiatives and is currently the CEO of the Moosehead Campaign, an Indigenous-led movement to engage men and boys, and all Canadians, in taking action to end violence against women and children. He has worked across systems, from Native youth outreach worker in Vancouver's downtown East End to executive positions in government, including CEO of the Vancouver Island Aboriginal Transition Team, a government crown corporation tasked with redesigning First Nations child and family, youth justice, and mental health services. David is currently chair of the Royal Roads University School of Leadership Studies Advisory Council. He lives on the side of Coles Mountain in Lukwunjan speaking people's territory with his partner and 2 daughters. Welcome to both of you. We're so glad that you are with us.
Masi Cho, thank you so much for the warm introductions. We're so happy to be welcomed into each of your circles and to be here with a focus on an issue that is so close to each of our hearts at the campaign, at the Moosehead Campaign. I'll introduce myself in my language since I haven't met many of you before. I'll introduce myself properly. Hadi Sage Lacerte Sadni, Loretta Madam Slew, Paul Lacerte Spa, Saikana Lashabu Injan Yinkaktane Keo, Tebes Natalia Injan Lukwongan Keo. So I said, Hadi, hello, my name is Sage Lacerte, and my mom is the late Loretta Madam, and she comes from Lake Babine Nation, which is a few hours north of Prince George here in BC. And I shared that my dad is named Paul Lacerte, and he's from Notley Waten First Nation, also just north of Prince George there on what is known as the Carrier Territory. I usually start by introducing my parents, just so people know where we come from and who our family lines are. But our people are also matrilineal people. So our culture follows your mother's family line, and we have clan systems in the Carrier Territory. So my mom and her mom and her mom and her mom and her mom were all members of the Bear clan. So all of my mom's kids are all a member of the Bear clan. So I got that from her, and just want to really hold her up and recognize how sacred women and children are in our lives, and the bond that's created between the nature of the relationship between us as peoples and the land, and how we connect all of those things together. And that's really a part of the essence of the Moosehead Campaign. And I just want to share a little bit about what we have done since we started in 2011. I guess I can't really see most of you, but normally if it was if we were able to actually be in circle, I would do a bit of a check-in and see how familiar each of you are with the campaign, because we do have reach in all different areas of Canada, including in education, both in K-12 through post-secondary. We have connections through all levels of government, of course, faith-based groups, and yeah, I see some folks have their cards there with them. So normally we would just see where folks have felt most connected to the campaign, because this is really led by the community, by each of you. So thank you for standing in this circle with us today. And I'll just share that the campaign is grassroots. It didn't we didn't start at this big national scale that we are today. We started as only our family and then a few friends who believed that we would need to ask both Indigenous and non-Indigenous men and boys across Canada to stand up against the violence that is occurring towards women and children in this country. It's totally unacceptable, and it has gone on for so long that we've needed various forms of solutions, including national inquiries that, like the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls inquiry. But unfortunately, the violence has continued, and we want to be a part of the solution, and we want it to come from the people, from the community. So we are giving a bit of that land medicine that I talked about, and asking folks to mobilize and take action within their families, within their communities, and within themselves as an individual. My sister was 16 when she founded the campaign. We're hunters. Our nation, our nationhood is really surrounded in hunting and gathering in our culture. So my sister and my dad went out hunting on our territory, and he offers these teachings. And there's this really beautiful moment. I'm not sure if any of you have kids, but when you're able to impart knowledge and teachings that are really sacred and meaningful to you, to your child, was a really sacred moment to them. And he said, I don't want anything ever bad to happen to you. I think that you deserve the utmost respect, and that I want to influence other men around me to behave that way, because it looks like some people are getting confused and think that it's okay, and that it might even be a part of love to be violent or harmful to someone. And that is not love, and it is not okay. And so my sister became overwhelmed knowing that members of our own family and community had gone missing and been murdered as a result of this violence. And at 16, I think it was overwhelming, and she just said, I'm so tired of hearing these stories of our people being hurt, of our people being harmed, being put in harm's way. And it feels like there's not enough being done. It feels like we need to be more actionable. It feels like we need to have a larger influence on folks, and we need to do it in a good way. So what we've done since then is, they didn't have any money. We weren't totally organized at that time, but what we did have was our cultural practice of doing the moose hunt. And we took home the moose hide from that hunt, and we tanned it and we cut it up into these little squares. They weren't as little as these are today. They started off way bigger. But me and my sisters sat around our dining room table and we cut them up. We punched a little hole in them and we wrote on an index card. We said, we believe that women and children deserve the right to be safe and respected and live a life free of violence. And if you believe the same thing, please wear this pin to show your commitment to standing up. And to having an influence on others to do the same. So we handed out the first 25,000 and quickly realized that similar to this circle and everyone in this room, each of us certainly know a woman or child who has experienced violence or harm in their life. Just listening to those statistics at the beginning of this circle that were shared, we know the rate of violence is tremendous and horrifying to hear, and the numbers aren't going down, unfortunately. And so especially through COVID, I think that there's a few intersecting pieces that are quite relevant today as well. One of the pieces that I really want to address that we talk about a lot at the campaign is why do we ask specifically men and boys? And also why the moose? So I explained a little bit about our hunt. This is what we call an innovation, an Indigenous innovation. It was created from our family's perspective and from our territory with that in mind. It also was heavily influenced by the Highway of Tears, Highway 16, where many of the murdered and missing Indigenous women in British Columbia did go missing along that highway. And so just calling attention to that founding story while recognizing that Canadians all across this country can relate to that story, regardless if they are Indigenous. So we always just want to call attention to that piece and remember that this is the reason why we chose moose, is that you can have a little piece of the land with you and it's there right over your heart. So if you have a piece of moose hide, we would encourage you to wear one over your heart and to bring them into your organization and see how you can become more involved in having that influence in your workspace or in your family space as well. But we also recognize in terms of why we would ask men and boys, and then I'll pass to one of the men in our circle here, Dave, who will share a little bit more about our work, is that we recognize that this has been burdening women's organizations, and there have been women have been asked to bear the burden of solving this issue of gender-based violence for far too long. This is not a woman's issue to solve. Violence towards women is not a woman's issue to solve. And so we wanted to ask for men and boys to play a larger role in that solution-based actions towards asking folks to be more involved in their community, and to dig deeper into the medicine and dig deeper into the connection that would be involved in making sure that we're not doing any more of that harm. We did attend a gender-based violence conference where there were hundreds of people in attendance, and my dad was there, who co-founded the campaign with my sister, and he was one of only 4 men there, and it really frustrated him. He just said, again, I want to have an influence on the men around me to make sure that they're acting from a place of dignity and respect. And I'm really disappointed to see that there aren't more men and boys here. So I want to be able to stand up as a role model. And we've continued that, using that model throughout the lifespan of the campaign, asking men and boys to stand up and to be a part of the solution. thank you for being willing to hear. I know that it's Tuesday morning and this is a challenging topic, but the way that we're able to deepen our connection with each other and the way that we're able to make change is by each of you coming and being willing to be vulnerable with me today and to hear my family story, knowing that it's a common thread for many families across Canada. So I'll turn to my Uncle Dave, and I can write my email in the chat. I know that there's some emotional supports here, folks who, if you have to reach out, then you're very welcome to, but we're always open to have conversations following these discussions. So Masi Cho, and I'll pass over to Dave.
Thanks, Sage. Like Sage, very honored to be here. I'm just going to do a time check with Susan and or Beth, whoever is doing that, just to make sure. Because I kind of lost track of time, sorry. And I always love hearing Sage talk. And we did a lot of presentations together leading up to our last May event, which I can share a bit about. And but we haven't done a lot of presentations since then, so I lost track of time. So you could either send it in 12 minutes. Okay, great. First of all, just, Senabo Wagan, to say that, how is the peace with you, as my ancestors would have said, in a way that is asking if you remember the peace, not only within, your community, but within yourself. And so I just want to pick up on a couple of things that Sage shared. And first of all, just to say how grateful we are that we've been invited into your circle and this opportunity to share a little bit about the work that we're doing and the vision behind the work and the effort that we're trying to make. And when Sage had mentioned this conference was just before the campaign was founded. And actually, I was working in government overseeing Indigenous policy for the province of BC, and we decided to put on this conference. And it was something to be there with. It was a conference specifically focused on violence against Indigenous women and children in Canada. And this was before the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Inquiry, which many of you might know about, a national inquiry. And I was only a few years away from, I used to be an outreach worker in the downtown east end of Vancouver, and was focused, this conference was focused on this issue. And there was only 10 men and we all went, where are all the men in this space? And so we've, over time, evolved the campaign to just say that, this is, it started before the Me Too movement or the MMIWG. And so it started being just cooking along under the ground in a sort of grassroots kind of way. And we've never really promoted the campaign in any major way until about 2 years ago. And part of that is that we just gave out the moose hides. And so I just want to share that you can go to our website, mooseheadcampaign.ca, and order pins for free. We consider them a medicine. And from a traditional perspective, you always offer the medicine. You never give the medicine, you offer it, which is, there's a difference there. And you offer the medicine for those who feel called to wear it, always for free. We have a forever promise that they will always be free. And so we offer this medicine as one of the ways of intervening into the unconsciousness of a society that allows the statistics to be where they are, as Michael had shared. And this is a human condition, this unconsciousness. From a traditional perspective, we would call it unconnected, that to be in a violent space, you need to be unconnected from yourself, unconnected from any sense of grace within yourself, to be egregious in your violence, to be unconnected from really the sort of alignment of whatever that means for you, to be in alignment with the good intentions that are at the center of all human beings that we believe are. And so this lack of connection is also something that we want to be very conscious of in this space, is that the hide is meant to be, it is never, and particularly for men, it's never a badge of honor or signaling some kind of special virtue that you have. It's a acknowledgement of a frailty and an ease of how quickly we can become slip off the path of being aware of ourselves and being able to hold our own seat. And part of this goes back for us in the sense of we've anchored our work in focusing on men and boys, but we invite all Canadians from all genders and all gender identities and all backgrounds to be part of the campaign. And it isn't centered in Indigenous as an Indigenous medicine, but it's an Indigenous medicine specifically for each and every human being or my puppy Sophie, who's beside me now, wears a moose hide. Any being who feels they want to stand with and be conscious of this issue and raise it out of the darkness. Violence, and this particular kind of violence, gender-based violence, thrives in the darkness. So it's a bit of a light, we hope, into that dark space. And it's an opportunity, I think, to invite ourselves and each other to just take a little bit. It's not everything. It's not solving the world's problems, but it's just a little bit of being a little bit more aware, a little bit of practice. And it's actually something you can do. It's not just, it's something you can take a stand with. So it's a little piece of land, inch by inch, that you can stand on this issue. We invite you to, when you order the Moosehead pins, order as many as you want. Have them in your, on you, hand them out where you want to, always with the intention of love. And so when people go, hey, what's that on your, lapel? We often just go, thank you for asking. It's a piece of moosehide. I'm standing up against violence towards women and children. It's not right. It's not love. It's completely preventable. This is not something inevitable that's outside of our control. It's something that is within our control individually and collectively. And so we have a vision of 1 million Canadians fasting together with us. We anchor ourselves in this little fasting. It's a very simple fasting ceremony, sunrise to sunset for one day. Doesn't mean that we're not walking around complaining about it all day, but it's just one day, sunrise to sunset. We do want to do it every year. This coming next year, it'll be on May 11th. And the sunrise to sunset is an invitation to just go without for a bit of a day. I think many people in this call will know the connection the embodiment of our values that comes through fasting, the embodiment of our commitments and our values, and the deepening of our faith, whatever faith that is, that says, I'm going to create some space in my body and my being for a little bit more than just food today. So that it's that fasting piece that we do every year. So we invite people into that fast. And we have a vision, I said a vision of 1 million, because we think that the reality of domestic violence is egregious. And we want to have an egregious vision and goal to match that. We have a vision of 10 million Canadians wearing moose hides. We were lucky this year, Sage and I were honored to be able to gift our 3 millionth moose hide pin to the Honorable Murray St. Clair, who's been a big champion of us all the way along, and the work we're trying to do. And, I wanted to share that we've got a lot of impact measurement that we've done over the years. We know that for every moose hide pin we've given out, there's been at least 5 conversations. We have an independent impact measurement firm out of Vancouver that's followed us for 5 years. And they say, it could easily be up to 60 or 70 conversations per pin. For those who wear them, we've had a lot of people come and say, I've had hundreds of conversations. If I wear this pin for a year, I'll have, 20 conversations a month about it, and or whatever the number is. So, and again, I want to go back that this is a medicine. So we have a group of otherwise unemployed Indigenous women just up the peninsula from where we live here, who we've created a little social enterprise, and they do all the work around the moose hides. All the moose come from moose who have been who have died on train tracks or in road accidents. A few from traditional hunters, but when nobody's out hunting moose for the Moosehead Campaign specifically, there's lots of moose hides that go unused, and so we wanted to use those. And then, so the two things we have are the intervention of the Moosehead pin, with 3 million Moosehead pins out there and 5 million, 5 conversations, that's 15 million conversations we're comfortable to say has happened, and probably much more. And we're really trying to work at the K-12 and post-secondary level, just as well as, we're very interested in the faith-based community, partly because there's an anchoring of an understanding of how living our values we have in our, you might have the same teachings, but we have to meet the Creator halfway. We can't just expect the world to be a good place. We have to meet the Creator halfway in our work. And so this is one way of just saying, we're going to do something. I don't know that it's going to work. I don't know if we don't know, but we're just doing our best to try and create a space where people are aware and conscious. And so again, I'll just, in the K-12, we have a lot of work going on in the K-12. We had an event this year with hundreds of thousands of people tuned in for the K-12 to hear, then to take workshops and watch the day. And we're hoping to have a million Canadians do that next year. A day where we sort of stop and go, we can't fix everything today, but we're going to fix this one thing. And it's just going to be today. So, yeah, I just want to, share again that we're really grateful to be on the call. And I'm not sure. I'm sure I'm getting close to the time I should be winding down. We are a campaign that runs only on the donations and support of folks. So we have it's in our way. We always put out our verbal collection plate when we're meeting. Just like, if you are interested in supporting the campaign, any support that you offer would be able to go to creating Moosehead pins and getting these Moosehead pins into the hands of mostly K-12 right now. That's where a lot of our focus is, trying to get into the young kids and the K-12 space, but they go everywhere. There is well over 3,000 communities and organizations that have ordered the Moosehead pins, and every time people order, they're offered an opportunity to leave a message or something, and we have probably well over 10,000 messages of people saying things like, "Hey, I got these pins I gave them out to my sons, and we had a long conversation, and once, and we're doing a bake sale to raise money for the women's shelter," and like thousands of conversations of people taking this, making it their own, and doing something in the world. And we just want to offer and ask that if you do wear it, and carry it in a way that makes sense to you, in a way that you is from your heart. And it's not our message, it's your message. We're just offering this as an opportunity to lightning rod this issue into our collective space. So thank you very much. And I'll go on mute now.
Sage and David, Masicho, that was absolutely wonderful. I'm wearing my Moosehead pin, and I have spread them not just around my church and with my council and so on, but I've taken them to Palestine and I've taken them to Germany, and I have plans to take them to other countries where they need these initiatives as well. So thank you very much. That was wonderful. We're going to take a moment of silence now, just to remember those who are victims and to honor their stories. So I'd invite you to join me in that silence, and there'll be a bell that plays at the end. Thank you all. I'm really pleased to introduce our next speaker to you. Danielle Strickland is a spiritual leader, justice advocate, communicator, and peacemaker. Her aggressive compassion, I love that phrase, aggressive compassion, has served people firsthand in countries all over the world, from establishing justice departments and church plants, to launching global anti-trafficking initiatives, to creating new initiatives to mobilize people towards transformational spiritual life. Danielle trains, advocates, and inspires people to live differently through initiatives like Amplify Peace, Brave Global, IMBY, Infinitum, and the Women Speakers Collective. This year, she released the book, The Other Side of Hope, flipping the script on cynicism and despair and rediscovering our humanity. In 2002, she published Better Together, How Women and Men Can Heal the Divide and Work Together to Transform the Future. Her podcast is listened to by thousands globally. Currently based in Toronto, Danielle is the proud mom of 3 boys, wife to Stephen, and as an Enneagram 7 has been affectionately called the ambassador of fun. Thank you so much for being with us, Danielle, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susan, and a special thank you to Sage and to David. Wow, inspiring stuff. I've got a to-do list. I made copious notes, so I'm hoping to be in touch. Anyway, incredible. And so many great reminders too about the real dilemma that is our current injustice that is facing us around the violence against women and girls. Particularly, Sage, I love the reminder that it's really not women and girls' problem. It's just that we bear the results and the fruit, the unhealthy fruit of that problem. I wanted to share with you just a little thing here that might help you think through some of the implications. Can you see that? Okay. This is called a Swastika Forest. And this was discovered, it's all over Germany and all over France. Actually, there's several of these. It wasn't discovered till the year 2000, but it was planted, they estimate, around 1936. They don't know exactly who, Nazi youth perhaps, or maybe some Nazi sympathizers in those regions planted these special trees. So these trees are planted in these massive forests, but they're a particular kind of tree that actually turns a shade. You can see that yellow shade during one time of year. So for years, I mean, I think I calculated it over 64 years, these trees just remained completely invisible. And then the country was ordering some aerial photographs to do some land stuff. And in one of those aerial photographs, it so happened that they captured this aerial photograph over this region and were surprised to discover this symbol raging on. And the reason I want to share that is that I think violence against women, the cultural reality facing women and girls in Canada today is not always seen. It's not always seen. It's been at work though, and it is deeply rooted and planted in our own cultural norm. And we don't often see it when it takes campaigns like, the Moosehead Campaign to begin to for us to even recognize that it's still there, that there's something deeply wrong way back in a root system that needs to be undone. Now, what's interesting about this is when they discovered this, of course, they're horrified and they need to fix it. But fixing it proved very difficult. And you can Google this and find it for yourself and read all the newspaper reports about it. But fixing it was hard because they didn't want to destroy the existing forest. And they wanted to minimize the damage to the forest while getting rid of the embedded symbol of injustice within it. I can't think of a better image of how we're trying to fight violence against women when it's embedded into some of what we would call normal culture in the stuff of what we're living. So that reminds me, and I want to share one more image with you. It reminds me of a trip that I took to Rwanda, a learning trip. I was there with an organization called World Relief, and I met a man. Can you see this tree here? I met a man who uses this, what he calls mindset, transformational mindset training. He used it in a region of Rwanda. And this region was 80% domestic violence. It was filled with domestic violence. And this one specific community leader, he happened to actually be a pastor. He took this training that taught him about this tree. They used a tree that's native to Rwanda. And they taught through how transformational change happens. So if you look at, we see the results, what is seen. That's usually what we see first. Although many times, even in my own life, I don't look at the bad fruit of my life. I usually hide it. I put it in a basket and stick it somewhere else. And I point out the other fruit. But actually the bravery to actually look at results that we're not proud of is one of the first steps towards transformation. So this man took this training, he's a pastor. And the reason he took it is because he was looking for transformation in his own life. He was pretty successful according to all of the measurements, except at home. His home life, he said to me, it's really hot in Rwanda, but it's super ice cold in my own home. His relationship with his wife was terrible. His relationship with his kids were terrible. And he was asking himself why. So he had to look at this fruit. What are the results? The fruit is bad. Then what are the actions that are causing this? This would be the branches of the tree. What am I doing that's making this result? This is where most of us stop when it comes to change. I think even when it comes to violence against women, we're tempted to stop here. Well, just cut it out. I mean, that's why, like, just cut it out. Just stop it. Like, just stop being violent towards women. Like, come on, people, like, just cut it out. This behavior modification approach makes a lot of sense to us, and we're really familiar with it. Anybody still diet, right? We're super familiar with this idea of change. It just doesn't bear any transformational results, and we know this. But it's important still to go through there, but there's just more to do. So he identified that the actions that were causing the bad fruit in his home was his own violence towards his wife. So he beat his wife, and he actually was very physically authoritative with his children as well. So he recognized, okay, this action is causing a bad result in my home. And then if you want to go a little bit deeper, you're going to go to a value-based conversation, which is more like the main trunk. What is best? What are the values that are feeding this action, which is bearing these results? And that is, for him, he identified very clearly the values associated with this behavior are control, are dominance, are his sense of self, are him being respected, all of these kind of values that were big on his sort of patriarchal understanding of what it means to be a man. But that isn't enough either for transformational change. To really get to transformational change requires us to go even deeper still to our belief system. What is it that we believe to be true that then fuels our values, that then actually creates actions that produces fruit? What is it that's at the heart of the matter, the deeply rooted belief system? And when he was doing this training, he said, I literally remembered a conversation I had with my dad, or rather a conversation my dad had with me, saying to me, you are not a man until you are respected. You are not a man unless your children fear you. You are not. And he said, I remember this conversation with my dad when I was doing this training. And he said, then I actually started to remember other men that I highly respected for their relationship with their wives. And even in his own, he's a pastor. So he said, then I actually looked at the life of Jesus, and I looked at how he treated women. And I started to realize, wait a minute, I think that belief system is not true. That to be a man, being dominant over your wife or whatever it is, being physically violent towards your children or whatever it is, it deconstructed that belief system. He was like, aha, that is not what it means to be a man. And he replaced that belief with the belief that to be a man means to be connected. Beautiful words there, David, that you shared earlier about this connectedness being the problem. How's your peace? Right? And to be a man is deeply tied to that connectedness, to that value, to that respect to other people. And that belief system began to transform the way that he related to his wife, the way that he related to his children, and it began to transform their home. What's really cool in the story is that because he was a community leader, his church leadership team saw what was happening in him and said, can you teach us too? And he started to do this mindset training all across his region and decrease the domestic violence rate by over 60%. It's unheard of. You're just like, how on earth? That's why we got into this conversation and shared this, because I said, how did you do that? Tell me everything. I need to know everything. The reason I want to share that is because I think that same principle at work around transformational change is not even just true in our own lives. I think it's deeply connected to our own lives, but I also think it's deeply connected to our cultural value systems and our beliefs, our deeply rooted belief systems. And in my experience, sort of even some of the narrative that we have around equality, you know, with our rhetoric is not the problem. It's our actual fruit that's the problem. That is evidence that there's something else wrong. This is not just a behavior modification problem. It's a deeply rooted belief system that is a problem. And I wanted to share just a couple of stories in my experience in Canada. And a lot of my work has been with women who have been, who I've been trying to help and who they have been building resilience to get out of sexual exploitation in a variety of ways. And one of them I wanted to share was in Edmonton. So I lived in Edmonton for many years and did survival sexual exploitation relief and sort of invitations to partner with women to get out of that cycle of violence. But also we did what we call brothel chaplaincy, where we went in and tried to create meaningful connections with people who were inside massage parlors. And I remember one specific, becoming unusual friends with a woman who managed several of those massage parlors, which are really just nice Canadian ways of saying brothel. And I was, you know, we were friends, which was weird because we were on the opposite table of legislation. So we were like both going in different directions of what we thought were the solution to the problem, but we actually connected to each other. She was an incredible woman, obviously super successful, business savvy. She was strong, she was capable, she was smart. And I remember asking her one day, you know, why with all of these things that are true of you, you know, with all your success and your skills and your, you know, all these things, why do you do this with your life? I'm just wondering why. And I remember her taking me into a back room and shutting the door so no one else would see. And she said to me, when I was 11 years old, I was raped by my father for the last time. I ran away from home. I literally ran up this very street this massage parlor's on, looking for some safety. And a man in a truck pulled over and offered me a place to stay for the night if I would have sex with him. And she said, I was 11 years old and I turned my first trick. And she said, I cried the whole night. And then I cried the next night. And then I cried the next night. And she said, eventually I got so tired of crying that I decided to do the very best with what I'd been given. And when she turned to look at me, her eyes were for the first time ever seeing this kind of like tender child within her, where she was filled with tears. And she said to me, where were you when I was 11? What I realized in that moment, I was overcome, of course, for her, I was filled with that pain. But what I realized in that moment was the familiarity of the story. I realized that I have heard hundreds of stories so similar to that one that leads to extreme versions of violence and death. And I don't know if this ever happens to you, but sometimes you get this, you know, these moments where this question becomes amplified. Where were you when I was 11? Where were you when I was 11? And shortly thereafter ended up with some friends, and we started a campaign called Brave Global, which is getting to girls, specifically girls who are at most risk or most vulnerable to trafficking, to try to prevent it. It's called Brave Global, and there's a Canadian chapter of that. Trying to get to girls with a message that would help identify a belief system where they have been told, and it has been demonstrated and oftentimes seared inside of their belief system, that they are not worthy, or that this is the best they can do with what they've been given, or that they are rejected, or they are unseen. But here's what I've also discovered. I've discovered that what I want to be true is I want this extreme version of violence to be something that happens over there to those people. I want it to be segregated outside of me. I want it to exist, you know, and obviously these things do interconnect in poverty and interconnect in all kinds of racism and interconnect in all of these things. And I want it just to be an other person's problem. That's what I want more than anything. And the truth of the matter is that the more we actually choose to see the fruit of a violence against women tree, the more we see it everywhere. So years and years later, I'm in Toronto, I'm serving as a teaching pastor at a mega church, very successful, beautiful rhetoric, great theology around women as equals and serving together, which is one of the reasons why I went there. And within a year and a half, a woman came to me and disclosed her own abuse history with the executive pastor of that church. Someone who I esteemed. Someone who I thought highly of, someone who I thought, no, that can't be. That man thinks right. And it exposed that same belief system, that same story of women as unworthy, as what it means to be a man, to take, to demand, a greed at the heart of things, and an objectification of women, to see them as someone you can get something of and take something from. That belief system that is rooted and embedded into a life that bears selfish, greedy, terrible, violent fruit. And I started realizing that, and maybe I continue every day to realize this, that this is not a problem over there. This is not a problem for those people. This is a problem everywhere. This is like in the forests of Canada, these deeply rooted swastikas, these symbolic moments where we catch sight, we see a glimpse of what has been rooted and established in our culture and in our lives. And the commitment for me, you know, and even this like beauty of Thursdays in Black. And by the way, I have been praying every Thursday in Black for, I don't know, 6 or 7 months now. Met with some Afghani judge friends of mine who asked me if I would pray publicly, not just privately, because they couldn't raise their voices for fear of death. And I promised them I would. And when I asked this victim, survivor, who said to me, disclose this information, and then the pastor has now been removed, and then also he's under criminal charges as well. And this continues. I asked her, instead of constantly calling her victim, it felt so unpersonal. I asked her if she would ask God for a name. You know, what name would you like us to call you? Or would you like to be a survivor? You know, what is and she actually really believed that God wanted her to be called Hagar. And if you know anything about the story of Scripture, it's a beautiful name, because it's a woman who is used by the people of God, by the way, by the great patriarch, by the family where the journey of faith came from for so many different faiths around the world. And used, sexually abused, and then discarded, literally just sent out to die. And in her invisibleness, in her, I can imagine this woman at 11 years old walking down the street in Edmonton in this, like, nobody cares and no one's doing anything and nobody even sees, and this doesn't matter and I don't matter, and this belief system inside of her being formed so deeply. Someone interrupts. Someone divine, God himself, comes and says, I see you. And I not only see you, but you're so worthy and you're so valuable. I see your future. I see like next generations upon next generations. And she actually turns around and goes back, refuses to be marginalized anymore, and goes back and knocks on the door and says, I've actually seen God. She's the first person in the Scripture story to name God. And they say, who is God? And she says, oh, God is the God who sees. God is the God who sees. And so that conviction, I suppose, is what drives me and continues to drive me, is that I want to get to the root. If you go further into the belief tree, the transformational tree, you'll understand that the root, our belief systems are formed by the soil that we're rooted in. And all of those things need to be changed. All of those things need to be challenged. All of those things need to be revisited and transformed if we're actually going to transform and change the fruit we're producing, whether it's individually in our lives, whether it's in our own relationships with other people, or whether it's in systems and structures that we're in that keep producing this tragic fruit. And whatever it is that we need to do, I'm all for doing it. And I hope you are too.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Wonderful to hear your stories, your experiences, for sharing the story of Hagar and for giving us that beautiful, beautiful image of the tree. Thank you. And again, let's take a moment of silence to remember the people that you have named and the hurts that we have acknowledged, the harms that we have acknowledged. Thank you. I'm now going to invite Beth Baskin, who's going to work with you all in a period of question and answer. And Beth, I will get you to describe how that's going to work.
Thank you. My name is Beth Baskin, and I'm a staff person at the United Church of Canada who gets the honor of facilitating this time together. I'm coming to you from the shores of Lake Ontario and the Don River in the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, but the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and in fact, the homeland, the home of many, many nations, Métis, Inuit, and First Nations folks who share this piece of Turtle Island with me. I'm going to invite you to put to questions in the chat, and I'm going to invite Sage and Danielle and David to come back and join me on screen. And I think the starting place, I mean, I really want to say a deep thank you to all three of you, because the way you have helped us reflect on this is that it's not over there, and that it's not an insoluble problem. There are some clear ways of being together in this work. And so I really have to say how much I've appreciated that in setting the tone. And yeah, I'm just we'll give it a minute or two to see if some questions come into the chat. But I guess for me, one of the questions that I always carry with me when I'm doing this work, and I think you've both touched on it a little bit, but maybe if you could just say a little bit more about what sustains you, how you continue to get up every day and bring this issue into the light, and bring this issue out to one another in the ways that you do.
I'll just say one thing. Sage hasn't had to leave, so okay. But Danielle, please go ahead if you will, and I'll follow you.
Sure. Well, I was just going to say you brought me a lot of hope, and hearing stories, I think, of hopefulness and stories of resiliency. And one of the things you kept saying, Dave, which has been something that's really been deep in my heart, is that light is the way that we begin, right? Light is the way that we begin. So I feel like every time there is an exposing, every time there is some light, some revelation of what is true, whether it's bad or good, you know, that there, that actually is super hopeful, because it means we're moving towards the light. So that's been super hopeful. I have just released a book called The Other Side of Hope, where I talk a little bit about developing a framework of our lives that where hope can be displayed. And one of the things that I've really grown in conviction about is that hope is not happy. And I think sometimes we get mistaken by thinking hope equals happy. And when we're not happy, we think we're not hopeful. That's not true. Hope isn't happy, it's honest. Hope is honest. And when we get honest with ourselves, with other people, in our relationships, that's where hope actually is seen, spotted, cultivated, discovered. And that is because another thing that I think I misbelieve that keeps me demotivated and cynical is that sorrow is despair. And it's not. Sorrow is, I mean, it's a good thing to do when there are things that we need to be sorrowful about, and a great deal of lament that needs to happen for us to really cultivate authentic hope. So I think sometimes we avoid sorrow because we think that's not hopeful, that's despairing. And the exact opposite is true of my life. The more honest I am, the more sorrowful I am about what is true, the more I discover that God is at work in those places. That's hope. That's hope, that there's nowhere that you can go where there isn't some sense of good and redemption and light being present in those spaces.
That's great. Thank you. What about you, David?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and it's for me, it's practice that somehow I'm very easily, I can get very theoretical and up in my head and spend my day, I can spend years there, as I think I have. So I really try and do daily little practices that remind me of things. So I have a meditation practice, that kind of thing. And, you know, the question itself, you know, posits, and I ask the same question of myself and others too. So, but it posits this sort of like egregious reality, and you know, us, these little people pushing against it, and I feel that, you know, I get to read when I want to the little snippets of people who order Mooseheads, and there's very, very few people that I've met in my life who are actually not in their core, even people that we worked with in institutions and stuff like that, that at their core don't know that this is not okay. They know it on some level. Even, you know, even lots of people who don't, you know, aren't active perpetrators or anything like that. We know this thing. And the disconnection I was speaking about before is, to my understanding, it's a experience that people have that causes them to disconnect, and they are begging on some deep level for connection. Now that might be to the creator, that might be to however that connection happens, and that connection is super intuitive for us. For us, we have little ceremonies where you hear this thing in All My Relations, kind of, might have heard that saying. It really means, for our teachings, that it's all we're asking for is to be connected. We're asking to feel not isolated, and when we act out of that isolation, we can get, you know, quite confused quite quickly. So all of that to say that for me, it's I think there is a massive army and movement afoot in the human heart. It's just we got to give it places to come out, and the place, and it doesn't matter where it happens. I think that there is goodness. I see some fairly toxic stuff in leadership positions down in the States that made me despaired for about 4 years. I won't, you know, point fingers, but it caused me to go, oh, like we have the capacity collectively to fall, to be confused, to roll around in the mud, to do all kinds of bad things, but our general trajectory is towards that connection, and that connection will sustain us. And that's kind of the broad theoretical framework. So just to go back to the final piece of that, is that's a daily practice piece for me. That's not it's not enough for me to know that. I have to practice that and find ways to do it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. One of the questions that has come in starts with a bit of a thank you here, and it says, thank you so much, Sage. First time hearing about this campaign, although I've worked with the White Ribbon Campaign, which is a similar mandate, but not to the extent and gravity of what the Indigenous community has faced and is still facing. Why does the White Ribbon Campaign not include messages about the Moosehead Campaign? So have you ever had, I guess the question really is there a connection between Moosehead and White Ribbon at all?
Well, there is on a couple of levels. So we've actually met with them and had like good conversations and sort of said to each other, like, let's just support each other in whichever way we can to you know, there's no shortage of work in this space and need in this space. So yeah, we do have a connection with them. Interesting enough, part of my journey around this was I was actually at the Ecole Polytechnique about a block and a half away one day in the 80s. When all these sirens started happening, all this stuff. So I don't know if you know, but the White Ribbon Campaign in Canada started up around the Ecole Polytechnique massacre.
Mm-hmm.
That was the one of the original people to be involved in initiating that was Jack Layton. Who folks might know was the previous NDP lead in Canada, leadership in Canada, and Jack, of course, passed away. So yeah, so we've had this connection with them, and they were in our minds in the early days of the campaign, just how, so the White Ribbon, it became the Moosehead Campaign, was something that in the early days, it was just really, I don't know, Sage didn't point this out, but the Highway of Tears intersects their territory, the territory, and the actual campaign started within earshot, literally, of the Highway of Tears. So it was meant to be sort of, well, we need something in this community that will get to these communities and give you know, give connection in these communities. So yeah, so we've got a good relationship with. They've come and presented at. We put on a national event, and they've come and done workshops there and stuff like that. So. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Another question that has come in, which feels, anyhow, has come in, says missing and murdered Indigenous men and boys outnumber missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls by a substantial margin. Some estimates put it at 2 to 1 versus the general population. And then goes on to say, it seems to me the argument for holding up missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls versus missing and murdered Indigenous men and boys is because men and boys form a perpetual class. Can we really continue to save our sisters while blaming our brothers when social science research shows again and again that gender violence is symmetrical? My reading does not show that it is symmetrical, but maybe you want to respond to that question.
I'm happy to, but Danielle, please go ahead.
Well, you know, I mean, much like when you identify fruit that's unhealthy and you know, unusable, you're not, you know, trying to disparage other unhealthy fruits. You know, that's not the point. You're just clarifying what specifically you are impacted and moved to help solve. So it's not a competition, basically. So there's that. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, you know, I'm unsure of what specifically you're referring to, but even when it is male violence, so even when men are the recipients of violence, it is over 80% perpetuated by men, even when it's against boys and men. So there is enough both, you know, statistical evidence and analysis, as well as personal evidence and analysis that this is a problem. And to identify it is to move towards solutions, which I think, Dave, like David, your language around connection, you know, this deep desire for people to move out of disconnection into a connected life as a solution is what we're aiming for. We're not aiming for vilifying or further disconnecting people. We're actually calling people to healing and connection and to be part of a movement that would liberate not only the people who are bearing the brunt of the oppression or injustice, but also the people who are doing it. We'd love to see them set free as well.
Mhm.
That's a great
Um,
answer. I have nothing to add to that unless, unless that would be helpful.
We're going to wrap up in just about another minute. We do have one more question here. It says, I've worked to promote this campaign in my work, especially in relation to MMWIG2S+, and thank them for the resources. Respect and equality were traditions in most matriarchal Indigenous tribal societies like mine, the Stoney Nakoda. Where do you see decolonization and working against or dismantling patriarchy helping your work?
Great question. First of all, thank you for the question and for acknowledging that and for spreading the campaign. We really appreciate that. I've thought about this off and on and I'll give a quick answer that is probably a two-dimensional answer to a three-dimensional question. So decolonization is, and the work of this is, and again, a practice. There's lots to guide that practice. One of the things that I think we are trying to do with the campaign, and I really appreciate how Danielle's work sort of seems to land in this kind of, I love the idea that hope is not, that hope isn't happy, it's honest. I love that. Is that decolonization for me, and I hope for a lot of us, and it's such a journey, right? Look, there's a good reason why the UN has said that what happened in Canada in history was a genocide. That's not an easy, it's a highly legalistic word. That's a highly, that's a high bar to meet. And we are just tapping the surface of what happened. We haven't really talked about the tuberculosis and the hospitals. That's yet to come. We are not fully got our minds around what actually happened in Canada. But in no uncertain terms was it a genocide, in my opinion. And so decolonization and the depth of truth that needs to happen, just, truth and reconciliation, is still a journey we're still not making. But one of the things we want to do, and this is at the center of my personal work when I think about decolonization and in my family, is it's not enough to take the pain out. We have to put the love back in. So it has to be, we have to be able to, as one of my elders say, you have to be able to drop your petals at the same time you're blooming. Those things have to happen. You have to hold the paradox of letting all the pain still be real and be grief, and don't turn away from it to a happy place necessarily, but be in the joy and gratitude of the gifts of life and the things that matter and why we want to be alive and be in this world. At the same time we're dropping them. So doing those things simultaneously, to me, is part of the work of reconciliation. And so I turn to people. I have a mentor, Chief Robert Joseph, who folks might know. He runs Reconciliation Canada, has been a close friend. We worked together in the downtown East End years ago, and he's been my guide around that. Here's an individual who went through, as I have two elders that inspire me in this, but through absolutely egregious historical histories, and have come to the place where those histories don't define them. They don't limit them in their love. They don't limit them in their ability to say, I love people and I love myself, even though all this happened. And Bobby Joel even say, I love Canada, and Canada is founded on the backs and the bones and the burnt bodies of Indigenous people in no uncertain terms. It wasn't like, hey, this is, we shouldn't be ambiguous about that, because it doesn't help us. We can be truthful, as Danielle is saying, and still, and that truth, I love that hope is not, about being happy. We can just be truthful about that and move forward.
Well, thank you both very much. There was one more question I was going to try and squeeze in, but I'm aware that some folks have other commitments and we wanted to give people some resources and opportunities. So I'm just going to leave us all with this question. Neither of you need to answer it because I know folks need to get off here, but the question is, how deep are the roots of violence and what must we consider giving up? We live in an economic system that depends on violence and treats others as less human to be maintained. What then of our lifestyles, our access to wealth and comfort do we need to let go of? How do we help each other to make that possible? And I think you have offered to us some answers to that question, and there are lots more answers that hopefully we can continue to seek together. And if after the fact you want to send any written notes or any follow-up to answer that question, I can get that to you. But I want to say thank you again to both of you, and to Sage, who had to leave us a wee bit early, and just really offer you blessings in the work that you, and we're going to move into a little bit of a practical other resources. So thank you so much. All right. One of the gifts that we have had in this planning this together has been drawing on work and expertise of a number of different churches and different individuals who have done this work for far longer than I have. And I appreciate that we have that here. And so one of the things that we're that's going to get put in the chat momentarily is a link to the Women's Interchurch Council website. When I arrived at my job in January of 2017, I think one of the very first things I was asked to do was to look at a hard copy binder of a resource that was designed to help church people look at violence against women, specifically at that moment in time, and that they were transitioning it to a digital resource. And so that's coming up on nearly 6 years ago. And so there is an incredible resource on the Women's Interchurch Council website called Restore that offers a number of different pieces of resources there. Also, thanks to Kath McKeel and the folks at the Women's Interchurch Council, WIC, we were able to put up an action plan, an action sheet page. And so these actions come out of our experience in our conversations over the last 6 to 9 months, that we invite you individually to see what's available to women in your community. And there's a national website called Shelter Safe that gives you specific ways, specific places to get help. There's also an opportunity for you to educate yourself using those resources I just touched on that are called Restore. And then one of the things that some of us in the circle have done and is simply to find out who is your local shelter and offer to help. How can you provide toiletries or other personal supplies to them? Often privacy is important, so you'll want to contact them by phone or email and discover the best ways to concretely help folks at that shelter. Our churches are not immune from this. And so one of the most commonly accessed pages is the clergy abuse page on the Women's Interchurch Council page. So we invite you to make sure that the policies are known within your community and that there's a real sense of accountability, because as David and Sage and Danielle have all said, if we're talking about this, if we're bringing the issue into the light, it is less able to flourish. And so one step towards ending gender-based violence is policies, people being aware of policies, knowing how to access those policies, training folks to look for signs and indications of violence. And there, again, there is a link within that action page that can give you some more wisdom on that. The other piece is we can hold our elected leaders to account. And our colleagues within the Presbyterian Church really named this as an issue in their current assembly, and they sent a letter to the Canadian government really naming housing as one of the challenges. And we are inviting you on our action page to read their letter and to consider writing your own letter to the elected officials, inviting them to really look at some of those underlying challenges, some of those underlying roots and problems. And so those are some of the resources you will find on that page. Also, through those links, you are able to access WIC, and we can find additional resources and are happy to have further conversations with you. And I think that's all I have to say on resources, unless one of my colleagues would like to add something else.
Thank you very much, Beth. Really appreciate that. And I hope and invite all of you to take a look into those resources and to think about how best you can use them as individuals within your church community, within your the community you live in, so that we can continue to work together across this country. We're going to close with prayer. It is a litany, and you will hear the phrase, "Living God in your mercy," and I invite you to join in and say, "Hear our prayer." God of wisdom and care, we pray to you for all whom you call to share in the work of transforming the world so that all people may live, work, and learn together with respect and dignity. For maternal and children's health workers and advocates for girls' education, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For lawmakers, policymakers, and lobby groups, including the Moosehead Campaign, shaping structures that protect and promote women's well-being, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For marriage counselors and relationship educators developing healthy partnerships and good parenting skills, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For religious leaders and communities of faith, shaping beliefs about the worth of women and girls and gender minorities, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For women in business, industry, politics, and education, leading by example and providing role models, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For police and community workers, sifting through the damage done by domestic violence, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For prison chaplains and restorative justice programs, giving hope where violence has shattered many lives, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For counselors and social workers offering a new start for survivors of domestic violence, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For women's refuges and men's support groups, for those who harbor and protect gender minorities, creating safe spaces for problems to be named and tackled, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For campaigners against human trafficking and the sex trade, pricking the conscience of complacent societies, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For organizations, programs, and individuals offering support to survivors of murder, rape, and sexual abuse, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For specialized care for traumatized children, bringing healing and hope for a life beyond suffering, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. For the participants here today, that we will all be filled with hope to continue this work against gender-based violence, living God in your mercy, hear our prayer. Hear our prayers, O God, for you will take no rest from your work of healing until you have wiped away the tears from every face through our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech Masicho. I'm really glad you're all here today. Blessings as you continue from here.